Saram, everyone, and welcome. Happy belated Pride Month. We're so excited to have you all with us today for our workshop, LGBTQIA plus Allyship 101. I want to be an ally, but I don't know where to start. And that's where we kind of come in.
So before we get started, we want to ask Swami to guide us on this workshop and be here with us and speak through us. So first, we'll start with this quote, just to remind us about Swami's teachings and set the tone for today. And yeah, so let's get started. So the same effulgent Atma is present in the hearts of everybody. People may wear different types of dresses and speak different languages, but the Atma present in all is one and the same. Names and forms can be different, but the divine principle is one in all. Sri Satya Sai Speaks, Volume 40. So with that, thank you. And we will begin.
So before we get started with our actual content, we just wanted to set some ground rules and explain some things before we get started. So this meeting will be recorded and posted on YouTube. If you would like your name not to be shown in the recording, then you can just message Sayanjali and she can remove them from the recording. And then please put your questions in the chat when we're working through some slides. Like if you have a question, instead of raising your hand, if you could put it in the chat, then we can, pause at a convenient moment and answer it. Or you can write them down and save them for the Q&A that we have at the end. And then obviously, please respect everyone. Try to stay muted especially when other people are talking or when, we're running through content. And then it would be really nice if you're comfortable to have your videos on because this is a space of accountability and we want to make sure that everyone feels included and safe. So if you could turn your video on if you feel comfortable. And then we're also going to have some audience interaction. So please participate if you feel comfortable. Like I said, judgment-free zone. So don't be afraid to answer our prompts or ask questions when necessary.
Okay, so I'll just go over what we'll be talking about today. So first on the agenda is why is this discussion that we're having important within the Psi community? And then we'll go into some terms that we should all know and be familiar with. And then we'll start talking about what an ally is and then how to put being an ally into practice. And then finally, we'll end with some takeaways and we'll end with like our Q&A session.
So it's time to meet us. I know some of you probably know us, some of you probably don't know us, but my name is Madhu. I go by she, they pronouns. And then I live in Northern Virginia, which is just like 25, 30 minutes outside of DC. I'm a consultant for the federal government, but that's boring, so we won't talk about that. And then just a little bit about why I'm here today. I think I've learned a lot from the Psi community through SSE and otherwise, and there are things that we don't talk about in the Psi community. Even now, like I have friends, Psi friends that, are kind of performative in their allyship. So, and the only reason they even know what they know is because they have a gay person in their life. So I was thinking about what can be said about all the Psi people who don't have that, like who don't have access to the queer community through a personal means. And I think it's a disservice to not bring a little of that learning and that understanding of the queer community into the Psi community. Next, we have Kavita.
Sarah, I'm Kavita. She, her pronouns. I'm a mental health counselor, therapist, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia right now. Originally from Tampa Psi Center. And yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And Sairam, I'm Sayanjali. I use she, her pronouns. I currently live in the Bay Area and I'm a grad student in chemical engineering. And I'm here because I wish I had a community like this when I was growing up. Like I wish we did talk about the LGBTQ community and like I did have some role models and people I could have gone to as a kid. So that's why I'm here. And now we will continue.
So why do you think that this is important in the Psi community? Now, this is a question to everyone that's here, all 40 plus of us. If you could raise your hand, then we can call on you. Doesn't have to be anything profound. Just, you came here for a reason, right? So why do you think this is important in the Psi community? We will call on people if you don't raise your hand. Oh, Mahima, I see a raised hand.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm here because I want to become a whole version of like a more whole version of myself, because in the context of the Psi community, I believe I'm striving towards oneness in one way or the other. So allyship is a huge part of embodying that oneness.
Yeah, thank you. And I heard somebody else talk. Can that person also answer? Or was that like a unmute situation?
I can share.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
I think I have been a part of the Psi community my whole life, and I think in order to participate in sadhana, I think we have to create an environment that is conducive to that for all people. And when we think about fostering an environment of love, it's usually dedicated towards one culture, one specific type of person. And so I really want to work on expanding the definition of who is included in the environment of love that we create in the Psi Center.
Yeah, I really like that response. Thank you. I think we can move on just because we have, oh, yes, her. Sorry. Go ahead.
Because it is core to Swami's philosophy, to what Swami has taught us, that we should love everyone, and the Psi Centers should be welcoming to everyone. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is the last hand that we'll take. Niranjan.
Right. So I'm from Dallas, and we did had one cross-gender person walk in once, and some folks didn't know how to handle, and I mean, how to welcome, how to greet, how to treat, that kind of a thing. So I'm trained at work to respect all genders, all folks. But I think it also needs some training, some understanding at individual level when we are talking about love also, all right. So that's my interest to listen in. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. A lot of your responses will be included. I think you'll see how as we move forward. But why don't we talk about why we think this is important? So we put on this workshop for a reason, right? So, Anjali?
Yeah. So I have a question for all of you is where are the LGBTQIA plus people? And I'm just asking you, like, how many people do you know that are LGBTQ that you know of, that you've met like in Psi Center through Psi communities? And for most of us, I think that number is really small. At least personally, like even through working through this project, I've barely met any LGBTQ people in the Psi community. But 7% of Americans identify as LGBTQ+. But we don't see this being reflected in our Psi communities, basically at all. And so we were thinking, like, why is this? So obviously, statistically, LGBTQ plus people exist, and they do exist in our centers, and they're definitely growing up, coming to our centers, like in SSE. But we're seeing that either people are choosing to leave the Psi Center, or they're choosing to not be out. And some people might say, like, okay, like, why would we even know if someone's LGBTQ, like, who is coming to our center? Like, we don't know, and it's not really important. But it is important in the sense that, like, you don't necessarily, it's just something that comes up in daily life, right? Like, we never see someone come to center, like a man coming with his husband, or someone maybe comes out as transgender and starts sitting on the other side. And these kinds of things are just normal parts of like daily life. It's not someone necessarily like bringing attention to their identity as much as it is someone just trying to live their life in a normal way. And I feel like we don't see that enough and we don't have examples of that enough, which means there's obviously some disconnect here where like we see that LGBTQ plus people exist, but they don't exist in these spaces that we have where we are supposed to be saying we love all and serve all. So there's some disconnect here. So people aren't feeling welcome to come to our centers and express parts of themselves that are just parts of their daily life. And at least personally, I've experienced a lot of love and support from the Psi community, but I've also experienced people not knowing how to react when I tell them that I'm gay, or they just don't understand how to respond to a casual mention of something like that, whether it's in a surprised way or in a confused way or just a flat out negative reaction. So there's obviously some form of disconnect that we have within this community, and we're not practicing this love all, serve all concept that we really should be practicing and want to be practicing. So now we will have Kavita talk about kind of like our conservative culture and the impacts that can have on LGBTQ plus people, especially on mental health.
Hi, Rom. So, I'm a mental health counselor, as I might have mentioned before. So, I have a lot of professional experience, also personal experience. I'm bisexual, and I've been in the Psi fold for a very long time. So first I want to talk about Adler's social belongingness theory. So Alfred Adler is a psychologist. He came up with this theory, which is basically that all mental health issues are exacerbated if you don't feel like a social belongingness. So that basically means if I don't feel like I belong in a community, I'm gonna feel like there's something wrong with me, or, I'm just gonna think like, oh, I suck, no one wants to be with me, all these bad feelings, and then I'm gonna be like loneliness, and that will be depression, and then ultimately suicide. So that is typically the conceptualization of how social belongingness affects your mental health. And so, yeah, basically the thing is like with the Psi Centers, that's one of the major places that a lot of us young adults and even adults find our community and feel belongingness. And for me, that was my main thing to feel belongingness. And of course, it's hard when you are part of the LGBT community and you're not sure how anyone else is going to react. So it's like you have to hide that one part of yourself to fit in. And then you still feel kind of like, am I doing the right thing? Am I good enough? Things like that. So, do some stats. Okay. So, as you can see, I'm gonna pull this up here. Yes. So LGBTQ individuals are more than twice as likely as heterosexual individuals to have a mental health disorder in their lifetime. They're 2.5 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, substance use compared to heterosexual individuals. And this is because, again, with the social belongingness theory, it would make sense why it's often you don't feel like you fit in, or you feel like you have to hide one part of yourself to feel like you're accepted somewhere. So the rate of suicide attempts is 4 times greater for lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth, and 2 times greater for questioning youth than that of heterosexual youth. These stats are from the American Psychiatric Association. And approximately 31% of LGBTQ older adults report depressive symptoms, and 39% report serious thoughts of suicide. So that is a pretty big percentage. Yeah. All right. So these are numbers that are just numbers. So we don't know these people, so it's easy to be like, oh yeah, whatever, these numbers. But I'd like to share my personal experience with this. I had a friend when out in 2018 was when this friend of mine who was gay died by suicide. And going to his funeral was the saddest thing ever. Putting those flowers around the casket was the hardest thing. And it was so distressing to see his family crying. And he had a younger brother who also looked. I mean, you know how it is. So going to that funeral, it's just so evident that this isn't just a statistic. These are real people. These are real stories. These are real feelings. These are people who do not feel like they could ever fit in, or they don't feel like they'll ever, that they're good enough, or that, that they belong. And so the worst consequence is suicide. And it might not always just be that. It might be other things, like other consequences of living with depression, anxiety, or self-harm, substance use, all these things to cope. And it's, even if it's not life-threatening for all of us, it is life-dampening. So it's important that we provide a space for individuals to feel like they belong, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's why I think it's really important that as a Psy community, we be there for people, because the impact is serious. And I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Thank you, Kavita, for sharing. I'm hoping that everyone took something away from what she shared. But we're gonna move on to how we can, create that space so that nobody in our community, nobody that we know, has to feel like that. So we're gonna throw it back to the audience. Well, our friends here. Why are you here? I know we heard from some people about why it's important that we discuss LGBTQIA plus community within the Psy community, but why are you here? Like, you specifically? Can we get some hands? It doesn't have to be profound, again. It can just be like, I don't know anything. Yeah, that's my father. You can speak.
Right. I'm here to express support, and in study circles, I usually facilitate study circles, and without mentioning LGBTQ, we always talk about divinity as one, and how each of us needs to, even though they may be different or unique, we need to see the divinity in everybody and love everybody. So we talk about this a lot in study circle, but not explicitly as LGBTQ. So I'm here to open it up. I think you've provided this forum. Thank you very much. To open up this conversation. This is like a study circle, which includes LGBTQ or mainly focused on LGBTQ. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Nirmala? Go ahead. I think you're muted, sorry.
Saramal, my thing is, instead of narrowing ourselves to Sai community, queer community, this community, that community, to just expand a little bit of our thinking and just try to love everybody no matter where we come from, or, why are we kind of narrowing ourselves to these small communities? Is it because we need to be seen as these little communities because we are feeling not seen? Like we say non-Sai community also, that's also comes up a lot. So I'd like to learn how to just be more expansive in my thinking and not narrow ourselves down to this community and that community. Yeah, I don't know, somehow in this world, we are trying to narrow ourselves to myriads and myriads of communities. So can we go like a little beyond that, maybe?
Yeah. Thank you for your response. I think we'll take Chitra and then Janaki, and then we can move on.
Thank you for doing this, first of all of you, all the organizers, amazing. I'm here to learn how to be an ally and equip myself so I can be a better support and a better side devotee. Sairam.
Thank you. Janaki? Oh, and Hyman after that, sorry.
Sairam. I'm here as sort of the older generation from India. My kids are growing up here, so they have a very good awareness and understanding of how to respond. But we don't have that much exposure as well. So I'd like to understand what is the right way to behave and what are the right things to say or not say. Sairam.
Thank you so much, Janaki. And lastly, Hyman? Hyman, you're muted. Sorry.
You are correct. It's good to see everyone. We're here because, you know, we love people. And all of our lives as people of color growing up in Chicago in the 50s and having a lot of experience all over many different places, we just find it very difficult that people just can't be respectful and kind and loving. And when people are really you know, systemically marginalized, you know, like this community and like the communities from which we come, you know, our hearts open. And we can't help but try to show some kind of support for those who are marginalized in a systemic way like this. And I think it's very important in the Psi organization in particular, because that's the clarion call within the Psi organization. And the contradictions are so broad when you see people mistreat people within the Psi organization. And we've had that experience ourselves in the early years in the Psi organization until I was able to achieve some roles. And then, you know, maybe out of just holding a role, I got some kind of respect, you know. But it's just, you know, we're just here because we do believe in love. We do believe in kindness and compassion and respect. And we think Psi devotees, above all, should be demonstrating that in every possible way. And the best way to do that is to do self-inquiry and work on yourself. You know, you can't expect others to do it if you're not doing it. And so when we saw that you were hosting this today, we just felt compelled to be here, you know, just to make that statement and to be in community, you know, with you.
Thank you so much, Hyman, for showing up. And this is the last hand we're going to take. We need to move on, but Gauri.
Hey, sorry, it's me actually, Abhinav here. We're sharing devices here on a chaotic Saturday afternoon. But for me, I personally am here because I feel like I'm rather unaware about what it means to be an ally, both just from a knowledge perspective as well as how I can actually be of support. So here to kind of help overcome some of my own ignorance and be able to learn.
Thank you for sharing. I think we can move on. Those are really great responses, everyone. Thank you so much for coming forward. I have on my notes, take maximum 3 responses, but you guys made me take more. I think we can move on to our actual content sharing. So to get started, we wanted to provide a bit of terminology so that puts us all on, you know, a level playing field. Anjali?
Yeah, so first we're going to talk about the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. So sexual orientation would be how you would describe your attraction to other people. So like, for example, that would be like gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual. Those are just some examples of different ways people describe their attraction to other people. And then gender identity would be how you describe who you are, like from a gender perspective. So like, for example, man, woman, non-binary, genderqueer. These are just some examples that we're using here. And these two concepts, at least from the Western like mindset that we've been like looking at the LGBTQ community from, in this like framework that we look at the LGBTQ community, these two things are independent of each other. They're not the same concept. So for example, like your sexual orientation and gender identity could be two completely different things and they're not related, or they're not necessarily like you can be both gay and trans at the same time. And those would be kind of like two separate concepts. At least that's the way, like in the US mainly, like that's the way we look at it.
So some examples of different sexual orientations are gay, being attracted to the same gender, bisexual or bi, being attracted to more than one gender, lesbian is a woman attracted to other women, asexual or ace is not experiencing sexual attraction, and then straight is being attracted to the other gender. You might notice here that gay, bi, and ace, well, these are just some examples. So on the slide, gay, bi, and ace are adjectives. So you can't be like a gay, but you can be a lesbian. So lesbian is a noun. And there are plenty of other identities that exist and are valid, and people identify in many ways. So just be respectful. And when you're using these words or using these labels, only use the labels that someone uses for themselves. So like if you know a girl that is dating another girl, don't assign her the label lesbian. Even if she doesn't use it for herself, because she could be bi, she could be pan, she could not like labels at all. So that's an important distinction to make.
Okay, so now we'll discuss gender identity, which so first we'll explain transgender and cisgender. So transgender, or shortened, most people will say trans, would be having a gender that does not align with the sex that you were assigned at birth. And then cisgender would be having a gender identity that does align with the sex that you were assigned at birth. So most people are cisgender, and then some people are transgender. So these are just kind of terminology that people use to kind of explain being trans and explain what that means. So then let's talk about what it means to be a trans woman and what it means to be a trans man. So a trans woman is a woman who was assigned male at birth, and a trans man is a man who was assigned female at birth. So if you know a trans woman, you would treat them like a woman. You would use she, her pronouns, things like that, right? And then a trans man, you would treat like a man. And that's just who they are on the inside, regardless of what sex they were born as. So then finally, what it means to be non-binary would be having a gender identity which falls outside or goes beyond the gender binary. So some people don't identify as either a man or a woman, or they identify as some parts of both, or it's fluid. There are all kinds of different sub-identities that fall under non-binary, but non-binary is more of an umbrella term that would describe someone who has a gender identity which is outside or beyond the gender binary.
And then another word that you might have heard before is the word queer. I think I might have said it in my intro. It's an adjective describing having a marginalized gender identity and or sexual orientation. So that's not cisgender and or heterosexual. It can be used as an umbrella term for the individual labels. It can also be a label for a person. Some people will identify, I am queer, or it can refer to the entire LGBTQ plus community. Now, queer is a historically derogatory word. So, be smart. If you're not queer yourself, I'd say don't use the word unless a queer person starts a conversation with it first, because you don't know their history with the word and you don't know how they feel about it.
Okay. So now we'll talk about the concept of pronouns. So pronouns honestly are usually some people get confused by them, but it's a really simple concept, right? A pronoun is just a word that's used to replace a noun. And in this case, we're talking about people. So it's really that simple. And so we will put a chart here of different pronouns that people would use. So they, them, she, her, he, him, and Caesar pronouns. So these are just some examples that people might use. And we also gave a sentence here that shows all the different uses of different types of pronouns in the same sentence. So would someone like to read that sentence with they, them pronouns, just kind of matching the A, B, C, D to where it says in the sentence?
We made it as easy as possible. So somebody raise their hand. Otherwise, I'm going to call on somebody. Okay, Falguna auntie, let's go.
I'm going to try. Okay. She went to bhajans on Sunday and left their tabla in the hall. I asked them if it was theirs and if they could pick it up by themselves.
Nice. Amazing.
That was perfect.
It's really simple. And kind of like when you are in a situation where like you might not know someone's pronouns or all of that, like you can ask. It's not, but also like volunteer your own pronouns and be okay if someone doesn't want to share theirs. They might not be comfortable, but it's like, it's not as complicated as people make it out to.
Okay. Nearing the end of our terminology, we have homophobia and transphobia. So I'm sure you know what these are, but we'll just go through them anyway. Homophobia is individual prejudice and patterns of institutional discrimination against people who are not heterosexual. So homophobia can manifest itself as individual prejudice between like two people or like a group of friends or something. For example, if you won't be friends with someone because they're gay. And then it can also manifest systemically against an entire community or group. So like hiring policies in the workplace, censorship in media, marriage rights, adoption rights, things like that. Transphobia is discrimination that results from the belief that there are only two genders, male and female, and that gender must correspond to biological sex. So that could include lack of gender-inclusive bathrooms, not respecting someone's pronouns, enforcing a gender binary, things like that. Now that we have all the definitions for the various parts of the queer community, what about an ally? So an ally is someone who advocates and supports a community other than their own, and allies are not part of the communities that they help. So Anjali and I came up with this diagram to explain what we find most valuable in an ally. Obviously, you can augment this however you feel, but I think that you can't be an ally without exhibiting all these three. So we have an ally supports others, educates themselves, and speaks up. And hopefully that's you.
Okay, so now we'll get into why you should be an ally, which maybe at this point you know why you should be an ally, but we'll kind of get into that. So the LGBTQ community is often one that we choose not to acknowledge. And a lot of times there is some resistance there that we see stemming from ignorance when like LGBTQ people are included casually within the side community. So like in a play or someone mentioning their husband and things like that. So this resistance does exist and we've seen it or heard about it from various aspects. And being present as an ally and kind of having that like understanding is really helpful and can help counter this ignorance and resistance that exists in the community. And this helps normalize the LGBTQ community for everyone, both so LGBTQ people can feel safe and others, and also so that people who are not LGBTQ just understand how to treat people with respect and kindness. And this doesn't necessarily mean that like queer people are going to start announcing their gender orientation to everyone. It's just people being comfortable like bringing their spouse or sitting on the side that aligns with their gender identity or just having a conversation with you about their life. It's like really that simple. And I think that that's kind of where we see some of this like resistance. So this like status quo of what we're seeing as like passive love is just not enough that we have. And no one should have to feel like they have to hide a part of themselves in their spiritual community, which a lot of people consider to be like their home. So kind of looking at those like those two aspects of this is really important as to why we should all be allies.
So we know we should be allies, and we know being an ally requires those three things. And I think we can all agree on the first two, like supporting others and educating themselves, like that's pretty self-explanatory. And most of us, do these things, like you came to this workshop. But what is so important about the last one, and why are we giving it special attention? So could I have one person raise their hand and read this? Preferably someone who hasn't said anything yet. Yeah, Hari, uncle, I saw your hand first.
Yeah. Why should you speak up? Krishna looked upon those who, even if they were good in themselves, did not oppose unrighteousness and injustice committed in their presence when they had the capacity to do so. So actual participants in the crimes, when evil and injustice and violence are being perpetrated, If individuals look on unconcerned, they must be regarded as accomplices in the crimes. In the end, they also suffer as much as the criminals. By their passive association, they provide encouragement to the evildoers. Sri Satya Sai Speaks, Volume 19.
So Swami is really calling out everyone. I'm not going to say that I agree with the criminals part of it, but maybe Swami has a point. But there is already, like Anjali said, there is already a festering undercurrent of discrimination against the queer community amongst other communities in the Sai community. That is a fact. And whether that's due to, I don't know, how generations were brought up, the things that the British brought to India, I don't know what the history is of that, but it exists. And it's generations on generations of prejudice that won't stop unless there is a force to stop it. So to not say anything and to not oppose this undercurrent is a problem. Like Anjali said, it's not enough to be silently accepting when people everywhere are feeling discomfort. We have to actively show that we are allies. Only then will people feel free.
So now that we've discussed kind of why this is important, what an ally unit is, now we're going to give you some tips, and then we're on how you can be an ally and put it into practice. And then after that, we'll go over some scenarios where we could look at, like, here's an example of a time where you could put this into practice. So yeah.
Okay, so we've established that speaking up is imperative and a prerequisite to being an ally. But that's easier said than done. Like, it can be difficult when you don't feel like you know the right thing to say. I feel like some of you mentioned in your responses that you feel like you're not equipped to, handle interactions well enough, and that's why you came here today. So the biggest thing that I want to say before we get into the specifics is that it's better you try with good intentions than to stay silent. So hiding behind I don't know what to say is basically passive love, like we've been talking about. That's not enough. And we're gonna equip you with some stuff that will make you feel more comfortable to say something. So saying something is equivalent to showing support. Otherwise, your support that you feel on the inside, that I believe that you also feel on the inside, is invisible and it's immaterial. Because if somebody who is struggling doesn't hear that you are in their corner, then you're not in their corner. So we've already equipped you with terms that you can use, but you have to make sure that you can still apply them correctly. So in this yellow box, we have just a couple of examples of like things that how you can alter your speech so that it's more welcoming and more respectful. We hear the phrase like she used to be a man or he used to be a woman a lot, but you should instead say she is a trans woman, because in the case that it is necessary to convey that she is trans, then this is okay. Otherwise, there's really no need to say that in the first place. The second one is you might think to say homosexual, which is technically accurate. There's a lot of negative connotation around that word because of discrimination against the queer community. So you should instead say gay or lesbian, and preferably use the labels that that person uses for themselves. And then also, when you are saying gay or lesbian, you should say it with your chest. I know a lot of people that will say like, oh, did you know that she's gay? Like, that does a lot more damage than that looks bad. And it might be uncomfortable to say these words if you've never said them before, or if you grew up in a community where they were taboo, or they're still taboo in your community. If that is the case, then you should practice.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about some like ways that we can actively be using inclusive language when we are in Sai Center, like just some examples. So when you're addressing a group of people, instead of saying like Sairam brothers and sisters or things like that, you can always say like Sairam everyone, Sairam all, Sairam Sai siblings, say Sairam embodiments of love. There are all kinds of phrases that are maybe a little bit more gender inclusive to someone who might not identify as like man or woman strictly in those boxes. And these are like honestly really like the lowest hanging fruit, right? It's so easy to just change your language just a little bit to be able to be a little bit more inclusive. Another thing is to be very aware of different family structures when asking people about their partners, their kids, etc. So like if you see someone who like you assume to be a man, it would be like it would be an assumption to assume that he has a wife and he has kids, etc., etc. So that is something that like you should just be aware of when you are asking people. Like you could ask, oh, do you have a partner? Did you come with anyone? Things like that. And then finally, if you're comfortable offering your pronouns, you can. So you can be like, Sayaramal, my pronouns are she, her. And that's one way to show people like, okay, you are like you believe that like in showing telling people your pronouns is important because not everyone you can tell their gender just by looking at them. Like that is an assumption that we're making about everyone. When we look at someone and we assume what their pronouns are, that is an assumption. So by introducing yourself with your own pronouns, you are kind of like bringing some attention to that idea that like, okay, it is not just like I am telling you what my pronouns are because it's not an assumption that you can just make. So yeah, so now that we've kind of gone over some of these tips, we're going to do some scenarios and we're going to go over some examples of how you can put this into practice. And so when we're doing these scenarios, just like feel free to put any questions you have in the chat.
Okay. So yeah, questions in the chat, and then I'm gonna intro this, and then we're gonna act it out for you because I'm a great actor. Okay, so pretend I'm the devotion coordinator for our center, I don't know, and we're preparing for the upcoming Guru Purnima program, and I'm gonna ask Anjali about another member of our center's availability. See if you can catch what's happening. Okay. Hey, Anjali, did you ask Sai if she's available for our Guru Purnima program?
Yeah, I asked them and they are coming.
Okay, amazing. So I was thinking of putting her down for Aruna Ramana because her voice is so beautiful and like she would sound so good.
Yeah, I'm sure they would be happy to sing. Also, just so you know, like Sai uses they, them pronouns. So instead you could say their voice sounds so beautiful and they would sound so good.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. I'll put them down for the program. And scene. So in this scenario, we kind of spelled it out towards the end, but I'm sure you could tell that I was wrong in this case. I was using she, her pronouns for this other member, Sai. Whether I didn't know, I probably didn't know, but Anjali corrected me in the middle of the conversation. And the important part to note is that neither Anjali nor I made a big deal about it. So even though you might feel a little bit of shame or embarrassment for having made a mistake, it's like it wasn't really, you didn't know, perhaps. So just take it on the chin and move on. And then actively try not to make the same mistake again. So if I had come back to Anjali and used she, her pronouns for Sai over and over and over again, and Anjali kept correcting me, that would be transphobic, all phobics.
Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of a different type of scenario. This is just one where we'll read and then we'll ask you what you're like, how you would respond. So does someone want to volunteer to read this scenario?
When someone comes out to you, you're grabbing dinner with some friends after center. One of your friends casually mentions that she's dating someone who's also a woman. Another friend responds in a very surprised manner and won't let it go the rest of dinner. They keep saying, I never would have expected you're gay. How do you respond?
Yeah, great, thank you. So does anyone have any thoughts on how they would respond to this?
We need some Jeopardy music in this moment.
Feel free to just raise your hand.
My mom is raising her hand.
Oh, nice.
She's not raising her hand on Zoom. She's raising her hand in the video.
Soumya, do you want to?
Yeah, there are two ways of doing it. One is the kind way, but if this person is just that oblivious to what scene they are creating, I would say that I never would have expected that you're homophobic or you're ignorant.
Good one, good one.
My mom likes to start things, so
Nice,
that's a
thank
good
you.
response.
Yeah, how about her?
Would it just be
Yeah.
okay to
So,
say,
yep.
well,
I'm sorry. I think one way is to, in a very excited manner, support the person, talk about, support them and be excited about, as you would with anybody else, about their relationship, about what they're doing, things like that, and kind of block out that that other person, kind of command the conversation in a very positive way and supportive way.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. Thanks. Okay, Mama, do you want to go?
well, I was just gonna say that, you can bring up like what kind of people are gay. I mean, anybody can be gay, right? Is there like a sign or something? So you could explore further. It depends on what kind of friends you three are, but you could say, well, what do you mean by didn't seem like a gay person?
Yeah, like asking questions could kind of like make someone reflect. How about Chitra?
So I think it's not only this situation. I think there are always situations in life where somebody would kind of unknowingly, unintentionally kind of keep doing things to embarrass the entire group, or, in the sense like, bring the morale down. One of the things I think we can do is one of us, like the allies, kind of slightly nudge this person out of that room or somewhere and kind of give them offline saying, hey, would it be okay? Don't harp on that again. Just be casual and, don't make them feel, bring the attention there. It's okay. I understand that you're excited, but don't make it very, intentional, like, they sometimes people are just excited. They just don't mean anything. Like, it could just be purity of their heart. Sometimes just people do that. So
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I feel like this actually is a scenario that happened to me, and I think that was the case, where it was like someone who was just excited, but they just didn't know how to like express this in a positive way. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Hari Uncle?
Yeah, I would actually, at least what I practice, whenever someone says something that, maybe against or whatever the emotion is, I always tend to accept. So I would have responded, say, hey, yes, I am gay. I feel very comfortable being gay. I think so far all the responses I've heard is more targeting the person who's saying that. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge who we are as well. And I think that's really what stops them. I think once you argue or antagonize or give a solution to them, you don't know how they're going to take it. So I think at some level, being comfortable with who we are, whatever the situation is, gives you an upper hand, I think.
Yeah, I really like that. I think the way that at least I had intentionally like written this, the intention behind it was like if you're watching this scenario, so you're not the person who's gay, but you're the person who's kind of there with the chance to kind of be an ally. That was the way I at least thought about it, but I agree that like that is what makes sense. If you are the person who's gay, like how you should respond. But yeah. Okay, so the last one is Niranjan, and then we will have to move on.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. So one is that it's when you go to Sai Center or anywhere else, unless openly acknowledge that the person is by himself or herself, their gender orientation, I would not know whether it's straight or ally or whatever that is, bi or a, right? So just because I come to know a person's gender orientation that doesn't give me the right to question or gossip or comment and stuff like that. And the one part which historically, if you're an Indian background person, we have been taught in different contexts, like Arjuna being a cross-dressed dancing teacher for some time, or Shikandi being a eunuch, or things like that. I've been brought in, all these Mahabharata and Ramayana and stuff like that, we should be aware of. And the person who is also not able to stop talking about, probably we can relate to some of these and say, hey, this is just the nature of things. So we don't have to be too worried about it. So neutralize somehow. Back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. That makes sense. Okay, so actually last one, we'll take Priya, and then actually it'll be the last one.
Saram, everyone. I would keep it, I would make a joke or I would laugh. I would say, hey, I don't think you can actually tell what someone's sexual orientation is based on how they look.
Yeah, that's great. That's one way to keep it light and just keep the conversation going. So that's awesome. So thank you all for your responses. I think they're all various ways of doing the same thing, which is trying to be an ally. And we all have different approaches to how we do things. And so they're all good approaches. We kind of just put together some thoughts that we have. So generally, if someone's coming out and it's good to try to match their energy. So you can try to understand kind of where they're coming from. And in this case, they're coming out, but they're just really just talking about their life. It's not like they're sitting you down, having a conversation, being like, I'm gay. They're just telling you something about your life. So you should respond to it kind of as you'd respond to anyone else telling you something about their life. I think someone mentioned you would just respond the same way you would respond in an excited way, oh, you're dating someone. And that's awesome. And just asking questions about that. So I think in this case, you all got it great. Just treating the person as if she mentioned she was dating anyone else, it's that simple. And then the other thing kind of to note here is that just because someone is in a relationship with a woman, as we went over before, it doesn't necessarily make this person gay. She could be bi, she could just not like labels, she could identify in some other way. So it's a slight assumption to assume here that she is gay. And then it's also another thing to make it a really big deal. So just to try to keep it casual and keep it positive. And yeah. So now we can move on to the next scenario. So in this scenario, Madhu and I are having a casual conversation after center. And I just want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we can go over it. Okay, so let's begin.
Oh my God. Did you hear that Prashant is trans? He used to be a girl. I didn't even know.
Why are you telling me this?
I don't know. It's so interesting. Isn't that crazy? If he's he's sitting on the men's side. And now that I think about it, he's he's kind of short.
Oh my God, this is completely inappropriate. This is completely normal. Being transgender is a completely normal thing. And it's not appropriate at all to be discussing someone else's gender and their body like this, especially when you're gossiping to other people who he might not even want knowing. I think you wouldn't appreciate it if other people were talking about you like this, right? So just so you know, Prashant is a guy and we should refer to him just like we'd treat any other guy. We can just talk about him normally. We can talk about what he likes to do for fun and anything else. Just treat him like a normal person.
Oh, I didn't think about it like that. My bad, I guess.
And scene. So in this case, Mother is gossiping about Prashant because he's trans and saying things about where he's sitting and things about his body, which is super inappropriate and no one would want people talking about them like that, right? And Mother's also misgendering Prashant with that confusion on he or she. Mother's not really saying that appropriately. He's she's so in this case, Prashant is a trans man. He uses he, him pronouns, and we should just treat him like any other man. So we can use he, him pronouns for him. We can talk about him as a guy. He would sit on the guy's side. Doesn't really need to be some big deal or drama. It can just be okay, cool. And we can go talk about, I don't know, what food we're eating or something like that. Just move on with life. It's not that serious that we need to be gossiping about these things. But yeah. Anyone have any questions or any thoughts?
Sairam, just a curiosity, maybe another perspective as I was watching you two role play this. Is it also because of a confused state for the person to even sort it out within their own minds how to address or how to go about it, that they're talking it out or talking it through with another person to kind of find the right reason, right way to do it? I took that as one interpretation. I know that another interpretation would be the person is gossiping, right? So is that an okay interpretation to understand, or maybe it's a more relaxed and calm attitude about that, and trying to educate the other person to get aligned on how to go about it to address Prashant?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think that at least the way, so we wrote this. This wasn't something that actually happened. We wrote this, but I think the way we wrote it was with a gossiping lens, but I definitely see that like other perspective where it's like someone is just trying to understand within themselves. But I think a lot of times when we are trying to understand within ourselves, we tend to kind of put that energy out in the world in a way that feels gossiping. Like it's not really on Prashant that we should be talking about him like this. Like if you have questions about what it means to be trans, like Google is free, you know, you can Google things, you can try to understand. And then if you come at these scenarios, maybe like with a more understanding, like with less of a gossiping kind of like energy and more of a, I'm trying to understand, like, hey, mother, do you understand? Like, do you understand what's happening? How do I, like, how can I use the right pronouns? Like, asking the right questions like that in a way that's like trying to understand is very different than kind of like spreading news because you think it's interesting or cool or just so crazy that you don't understand like how to deal with it. I think there's like positive and negative intention. So it does depend on the intention, but I think there's a way to, if you're in the position where you don't know something, I think the best place to start is Google. And then after that, like try to understand, see what's available, what information is available. And then the next place is to maybe start asking other people, but in a way that's like genuinely trying to understand. I just, from this scenario, at least the way we wrote it, I didn't feel like Madhu was genuinely trying to understand until like my character started correcting her.
I was just sharing another perspective, but thanks for clarifying. And I had personally gone through this type of scenario that you just portrayed, even as a example in real life, in work, when one of the person that I know I met as a man and became a woman, and it was hard for me to sort it out in my head because I had addressed this person who used to work for me as a man and then a he pronoun, and then I had to transfer myself, seeing the same person, not much of changes, but to address as she. So it was a little bit that I had to like reprogram my brains. Why? Because a couple of years I was addressing as he, and now suddenly I got to like transfer and address as she. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. Shivankal?
2 points here. With your ally framework, educate, support, and speak up. I think we have to be more vocal whenever we hear some ignorance coming out of folks, whether it is well-intended or if it is joking, and educate them, help them to the best of our knowledge, right? And also, this is about gossiping. That's the other part, So Swami does not like gossiping, and that's talk about ourselves and not about others in their absence. So I think educating them and speaking up every time there is a chit chat, especially about the LGBTQ community or any marginalized community or any community that doesn't have support as the majority, and speaking for them, because it is very tiring for somebody in that community to keep speaking up for themselves. So I think the whole purpose of this workshop is to have us as allies and take on that role and explain to others when things like that come up. So that they don't have to keep on interfering and having to speak up for themselves. So that's one point I'd like to make. Second is in the Sai Center, fundamentally, we don't comment on others. That's been Swami's principle, I guess. And sometimes it's at odds with speaking up. And we, as a Sai community, we don't speak up, right? And you're encouraging us to speak up. And so it's very important to examine ourselves about that principle. You know, when is it important to speak up? And whenever somebody cannot speak up for themselves, or it is very tiring for them to speak up for themselves, or whatever, everything that we mentioned, it's the allies that need to speak up. And so I think this is something that's a serious question for us to introspect and stand up for others. And so I think that's what you're awakening in us about this. Sarah.
Thank you so much. I loved that way of thinking about it. I think on this, we should move on now and go to the next scenario, just so we have enough time.
Sure. If you want to say something, put it in the chat, and then you can also address it later if you want it to be addressed. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last scenario. Does somebody want to read this? Please.
Let me read it for you. So, assumptions are harmful. You are a member of your center's welcome committee and meet a newcomer. To be able to update the mailing list, you're curious whether he has brought other family members. You ask him if his wife and kids came to center with him. He responds that he is gay and introduces his husband to you. This is the same scenario that happens to him every time he goes to a new center. How can we be more inclusive in the way we greet newcomers?
Yeah, so thank you.
Hey, this is my scenario, by the way. I'm just kidding. So
I mean,
anyway, continue, please.
It is a true scenario. So the other three are, kind of just loosely taken from what we hear, but what we anticipate. But this has happened many times to this particular person. Yeah, go ahead, Shreya. Oh,
sorry. Yeah, I think that, this happens more than we think. And I think that it's important that when a new individual comes into our center, it's important that instead of just making assumptions about if they're with a partner or if they're alone, we can inquire that in a respectful manner rather than just straight up being like, oh, did you bring your wife and kids with you? Maybe we can kind of say something along the lines of, are you here alone? Are you here, with someone else? Like, would you like to bring someone else to center with you, and kind of make it more open-ended so that they feel more welcome, instead of kind of, making it seem like, oh, like you have to bring a wife and kids with you, or you have to bring a husband and kids with you. Like, maybe they're single, maybe they're not married, maybe they have a husband, they have a wife, maybe there's so many things that can be said. So instead of just making that assumption, there's a lot more questions that we can ask.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Shreya. Prem?
Yeah, I think also more generally echoing sentiments that have been shared in the chat. I think at Center specifically, we don't do a great job of being able to be inclusive to all these people. And the gender binary is sort of so heavily enforced, whether it be what side we sit on or the socializing we do after or before Center. And I think we could all do a better job of keeping in mind this type of inclusive language, or this way to be just cognizant of everybody's identities and not robbing them of their agency to express who they are or just exist normally in the space that they want to be in.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that, robbing them of their agency. Thank you. Yeah, mommy.
So I remember that we had the same devotion coordinator for about 4 years at our Sai Center. And there was something that I really liked about the way this devotion coordinator welcomed new members. And she goes by she and her, so I'm happy to say she. She would say when somebody new would come, she'd say that, do you have any friends or family who have come with you today that you would like to introduce to us? It was that simple.
Yeah. And it is really simple, so thanks. We'll do Krishna, and then we'll do Pranav, and then we'll move on. Krishna?
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think this really just, for me, is a big reflection of what the norms are often in our Sai Center and in our Sai Centers. And I think I just want to talk about a distinction that I learned about from one of Swami's summer shower quotes, as well as from one of my mentors who's on this call right now, which is just distinguishing between norms and values. And so I think just fundamentally, it feels like we find it really difficult to challenge the norms in the community because we think they're the same as the human values. But the human values are very different depending on the time, the place, and the context that we are in. And I think we hopefully can all be open to changing the norms of our community as the age changes. And so I think this is one of those moments, but when I step back and think about this topic in general, I think there's a much deeper resistance and discomfort to addressing this topic, specifically because of the norms that we have been conditioned to believe in. And so really thinking about this difference between cultural norms and where they come from and how do we change them versus what are the actual human values and what do they mean to us and are they actually expressions of love and divinity within us? That's it.
Yeah, that's a really nice point that you made. Thank you for sharing. And then lastly, Pranav.
Yeah, I think the point I wanted to bring up was that, like, I actually don't know how relevant it is today to be asking people, like, you know, whether they brought their family or friends or like, I find that, you know, in an evolving world, like, you should be providing a space for people to bring that up on their own. And so, like, you know, sometimes I wonder, like, you know, is the best approach for someone who is coming to a Sai Center for the first time, not saying that, you know, who have you brought? It's focusing on making them feel open and like safe, and that they've arrived in a place where they can, you know, meet people and feel safe to bring that kind of stuff up by themselves, right? Because, you know, who are we to pry open? I think Shiva Uncle kind of mentioned this in the chat maybe before I raise my hand, but I just find that the best way to be open, or maybe it's a question, but it is the best way to be open is just to offer them a safe space instead of asking them explicitly about, like, who have they brought. It doesn't feel like the most important thing to me when you're trying to welcome someone into a family, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Lots of really good responses to this. I think this one is probably more, what's it called? Relatable. So Anjali and I came up with a few points. Oh, Kavita, did you want to say something? No. Okay. Oh, you did. Sorry.
Trying to unmute myself. I was gonna say that, yeah, I do agree with the whole, like, not asking that question of if they came with anyone, because sometimes people might be going through something like a breakup, or they might just have gone through a divorce, or they might be having a rough time. with their relationship, and if you ask that question, it might trigger it. And it's also like people do avoid social situations to not get asked that question because it's just like it brings up things and it's like, I don't know how to explain this, or they don't want to. So I think it's just easier, don't ask. If it comes up, they'll bring it up. If not, then just assume that it's like you'll find out soon enough if they had a friend or not.
Yeah, exactly. Those are some good points too. Thanks, Kavita. So Anjali and I put together some things that we thought about how to be more inclusive in this specific scenario. First, think is what you're going to say an assumption. So in this scenario, you're assuming this person is married. You're assuming this person has a wife. You're assuming this person wants to have a wife. And then you're also assuming this person has children. By asking this question, like, do you have a, like, did you bring your wife and kids or whatever? You're forcing this person to be on the defense and have to explain themselves to you. Maybe they don't want to have to, maybe they're not out, or they're not, comfortable with coming out just to this random person they met at center. And you're forcing them to do that because you're asking these questions. So in general, in these types of situations where, we meet somebody for the first time, especially in a space that has so many norms, like Krishna mentioned, in general, we tend to assume gender, and then it trickles down into assuming sexual orientation, marital family status. So like we assume somebody comes into center, we automatically look at them. We assume that they're a man. That's wrong. Then we assume because they're a man, they must be straight. Wrong. Then because they're straight, they must have a wife. I don't know if they're old enough. I don't know. It could be anything. And then because they have a wife, they must have kids. So all of these things compound on each other, and then you're left forcing this person to explain themselves to you. If in the very necessary circumstance that you have to ask this person, for logistical purposes, there are ways to get around that, but let's assume that you have to ask this person. People mentioned their own responses, like, did you come with anyone today? Is there anyone else that I should add to the mailing list? You could ask those types of things, but ideally the system would be in place such that you don't have to ask such questions at all. Like maybe they could go themselves to a Google form, submit their information, submit their family's information if they have family, that kind of stuff. So you don't even have to ask these questions in the first place. But in general, we try to be more inclusive with our language in the first place so that you cover all the bases without, like asking what the bases are, because that's not your information to have. Okay.
So now we will go through some quick takeaways that we have from the workshop. So thank you all for coming, and we'll just go over some quick reminders.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the takeaways that we have is the first one is what Kavita talked about, which is fostering belonging helps mental health. And then the next point that we made was that passive loving and serving all is inadequate. It's not enough to have these inclusive thoughts and want to be an ally without putting this into action, kind of doing those three things we talked about, educating yourself, speaking up, and supporting others. And then the next point we made is being aware of assumptions you make and working to try to avoid making those assumptions. And then finally, use inclusive language and treat everyone with respect and understanding and kindness. And I think if we do all of these things, we will actively work to create a better community and ensure that we are practicing being an ally.
Okay, so that was kind of it for today. We went through a lot of content, and I'm really grateful for all of your participation. We will be after this, we'll be going through the chat for any questions and any comments and responding to them, because we don't want to lose the conversation that's happening there as well. But today was brought to you by Sai Voices of Belonging. It is run by Sai Anjali and myself. It's an independent initiative that aims to celebrate the stories of finding and accepting our LGBTQIA plus identities and strengthening our spirituality and faith at the same time. So primarily we are on Instagram, and then we're also on Facebook, and we have a website, which are all getting linked in the chat right now. We post educational content, personal narratives by LGBTQ plus Psi people, self-reflective material, and we host somewhat monthly Zoom meetings where people get together to talk about being queer in the Psi community or being allies in the Psi community and our experiences. Currently, we are unaffiliated with the official Psi organization, so neither SSIO nor GC, but we hope to still be able to bring change in centers moving forward. So please follow us on these platforms to stay connected. And I'm sure that's how most of you ended up coming today in the first place. Thank you so much for coming and participating. And we hope to see you all involved and engaged with the queer Psi community in the future.